Thank you for your patience as we gathered quorum. I'd like to call to order the February 2024 meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us via the live stream video and those attending in our boardroom and via Zoom. A quick note for the record, Regent Kenyanya will be joining us shortly and Regent Talyarabe will be absent today. Let me welcome our student representatives for today, Alex Mittendorf from the Crookston campus and Ebba Waco from the Twin Cities campus. Thank you for being with us. The first item of business this morning is to discuss the completed work by the university's current external auditor. Here to provide the update are Controller Molly Viola and from Deloitte, Managing Director Judy Dockendorf and Audit Manager Nicole Hoyam. And Controller Viola, would you like to start us off with this item whenever you're ready?
Good morning, Chair Farnsworth, members of the committee. This morning, Deloitte will be providing an overview of the results of the engagements that they've completed since their last presentation back in December. This is part of their required communications and is also something to aid the committee in completing their oversight responsibilities in regards to our external audit firm as well. I'd also like to take a moment to thank Deloitte for their service to the university. This will conclude their current engagements with us. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Dockendorf to walk through the presentation.
Good morning, Chair Farnsworth and members of the committee. Thank you for having myself. Nicole Hoyam is not with us today, but I'll walk through the results of the last audits and engagements that we did for the university. I will move ahead. So we'll start with the federal compliance audit, so the federal expenditures that the university has. This is required when expenditures exceed $750,000. You'll see that in fiscal 2023, the university expended just under $1.2 billion. The university continues to qualify as a low-risk auditee based on historical audit results, and I'll walk through some more detail on the next slide. In fiscal 23, there were 6 major programs that were identified to be tested. So that testing involves both testing of compliance with the grant agreements as well as the internal controls over compliance. You can see the significant dollars continue to be in the research and development cluster and the student financial assistant cluster. So those end up being tested on an annual basis by us. And then there were 4 additional programs, some which had been tested in the past and some like the disaster grants from FEMA, which were new from a testing perspective in 2023. We issued unmodified opinions on each of those programs. There were no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses identified in any programs or question costs in those programs. And that report is in your materials. Additionally, on an annual basis, we do an examination of state aid. That results in reports being issued for each of the campuses separately. Our testing here involves making selections of students to understand their eligibility for state money and distributions that have been made, as well as any refunds that may have been required. There were no findings noted related to any of the 4 campuses, and you have copies of these reports as well. Additionally, we perform certain agreed upon procedures engagements. So on an annual basis, there are agreed upon procedures for the Twin Cities Athletics Department. And then every 3 years, either Crookston or Duluth as Division II institutions have requirements for agreed upon procedures as well. Those procedures are outlined by the NCAA, so they're applicable to all institutions that receive dollars from the NCAA. And we just follow along with the prescribed procedures that the NCAA puts out. Procedures there involve testing revenues, expenditures, capital assets for Division I institutions, as well as any debt that the athletics department may have, and then communications with booster clubs whose fundraising is really on behalf of the sports departments. Those reports were issued in December, and there were no findings noted for either the Twin Cities or Crookston. And the last item that we completed was related to certain of the retirement plans that the university facilitates. This actually related to the time period for December 31st, 2021. This was at the request of management, as these plans are not subject to audit requirements from ERISA. So we worked with management to outline procedures to perform here around eligibility of participants, contributions, both the employer and employee contributions, any rollovers, any participant distributions, corrections, and participant loans. So we worked through quite a bit of detail across each of these three plans, working with management, and there were certain findings here that were communicated. Those that resulted in issues with contribution amounts, either too much or too little being contributed, were corrected upon identification, and management took some action plans going forward as well. So that completes the audit work that we did here related to fiscal 23 and prior years. We certainly appreciate working with the university over the years, and I'd be happy to answer any questions specific to these engagements.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from committee members? All right. Before we move on, I would also like to highlight and express our appreciation for Deloitte's final presentation as the university's external auditor. They have served in this capacity since April of 2010 and have provided invaluable advice and guidance to us. So on behalf of the Board of Regents, I'd like to thank the team at Deloitte for their work with the University of Minnesota. So thank you
very much.
Our second item is to discuss the university's FY 2024 external audit plan. To lead our discussion are Controller Viola and then Jean Bouchong and Daniel Persad from Clifton Larson Allen, LLP, the university's new external auditor. And please proceed whenever you're ready.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It is certainly a pleasure to be here today. My name is Jean Bouchong. I'm the engagement principal with CLA. And with me today is Daniel Persad, also a principal with CLA. And it is our pleasure to go over the FY24 audit plan. Over the next couple of minutes, we want to highlight a couple of key core concepts with you. First, we want to talk a little bit about who CLA is. We are new to the university, but I'll keep that quick. And then we're going to dive into the scope of the engagements, what the external audit is and what the external audit is not. We're very different from what the internal audit function is, so we want to make sure governance understands that role. We'll talk a little bit about the timeline, and then Daniel's going to jump into the risk assessment. And then we'll talk a little bit about unique audit items for the year. All right, real quickly, who is CLA? Many of you may know us, but for those who do not, we are a national firm. We have offices across the country with over 9,000 employees, and we're continuing to grow. One thing we're especially proud of, though, is our industry-based focus, and we're very proud of our higher education team. We have over 200 employees that serve higher education institutions only, and we like to say we serve public institutions just like the university from coast to coast, from the University of Alaska to the University of South Carolina, and now we're thrilled to add the University of Minnesota to that client list. We are a top 10 firm, as you can see from this graphic here, led by the fearless Jen Leary. If you guys haven't had a chance to listen to her speak, I certainly encourage it. She's plowing ahead and forging paths for in the accounting industry. One thing that you'll see on this graphic is that we don't have a headquarters, but I would like to say that our largest office is that of our Minneapolis office, with over 12 offices here in Minnesota. So certainly thrilled to be here in the great state of Minnesota. So now that we've talked a little bit about who CLA is, we want to talk a little bit about what we'll be doing to get to really know the university. We've already started this process, and over the next couple of months, we will really be investing the time to make sure we get to know you. I did mention we do public universities across the nation, but to know one institution is to know one institution. We understand that you're unique. And so over the next couple of months, we're really going to be investing the time, whether it's having meetings with stakeholders to understand your processes, to understand your expectations, to understand your internal controls. We're going to get input from governance. We're going to have discussions with the prior auditors. They have invaluable information about what is successful in this process. We're going to make sure we collaborate with them to make sure this transition is as smooth as possible. We're going to review reports, internal control memos. In summary, we're going to be investing that time to make sure that we begin this partnership, this professional partnership with the university on the right foot. So with that, let's talk a little bit about the scope, what we've been asked to do. You guys just heard Deloitte talk a little bit about some of these engagements, but I'll do a quick highlight as a reminder of what we've been engaged to do. So the first thing that we'll be doing is that audit of your consolidated financial statements, right? That's that role where we provide reasonable assurance to the readers of your financial information if they can rely on those financials. And I'm going to dive into a little bit more of that in just a second. In addition, these next elements Deloitte did just talk about, but let me just do a quick reminder. We will issue what's referred to as that uniform guidance audit, that single audit. As Deloitte just mentioned, $1.2 billion in federal spending in the past year. And so because you receive hundreds and hundreds of federal grants, you're required to have the audit of certain programs. So we'll do an audit of those major programs and issue a report to determine if you are in material compliance. Very similarly, we'll issue those reports over your various campus state aid programs as required by the Office of Higher Education. We'll do those NCAA agreed upon procedure reports. In this year's scope, Twin Cities, as they just mentioned, that's done every year. Okay, so we'll do Twin Cities again, but then this year the Duluth campus is in scope. Again, this is a set of procedures the NCAA pushes down to us auditors and said, this is what we want you to do over your athletic revenues, over your athletic expenses. And so we'll do those prescribed, agreed upon procedures for both the Twin Cities and Duluth campus. Last but certainly not least is your captive insurance company, Rumenco audit. We'll do that in accordance with the Bermuda Monetary Authority. So that is a quick highlight of the various engagements that we've been contracted to do. So let's talk a little bit about what the external audit process is and what it is not, and the responsibilities of CLA, the responsibilities of management, and the responsibilities of governance. As I just mentioned, our job is to tell the reader of your financial statements, can they rely on those numbers? Can they rely on those footnotes? Are those numbers that your management team is publishing, are they free from material misstatement, whether due to error? Are they free from material misstatement due to fraud? And are they free from material misstatement due to noncompliance? We will build a risk-based audit process to determine with reasonable assurance if your financial statements can be relied upon. I think it's very important for governance to understand, though, our audit opinion is over the financial statements. It is not over the internal control structure, okay? And all of this that I'm listing is a strict set of standards issued by the AICPA that we adhere to, right? So during the course of the audit, we will test certain key controls, right? But please don't think of CLA as your internal control structure, right? Management is responsible for the prevention and detection of fraud, for the prevention and detection of error, and for the prevention and detection of noncompliance. Our job is when and if we're testing certain key controls, we identify material weaknesses or significant deficiencies, we are required to report that to you, okay? So understanding those are our responsibilities. Management's responsibility is for establishing that internal control structure for the publication of the financial information, right? You may be asking, well, what is my job in this process, right? Your job is for the overall strategic direction, the accountability, and for an oversight of the audit process. We're required to talk to you 3 times during this process. Planning, that's why we're here today. At the conclusion, the results. That's why we'll be back in December and again in January. But also in the middle of that, we're also required to have an audit interview with Chair Farnsworth. Okay, and so those are the 3 times you'll hear from us, unless there's material fraud or material illegal acts. If those were to be identified during the course of our audit, we'd have to contact you immediately. So as you can see, we all have different roles in this process, but we're certainly excited to get started with that. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Daniel to talk a little bit about the timeline.
Thank you, Jean, and good morning, everyone. As Jean mentioned, my name is Darren Prasad, and I'm one of the principals on engagement. So speaking in terms of the timeline, one thing to note is that this is a tentative timeline. We know that life happens, and the governance and also management might have some issues or something that would need to help tweak the timeline. So if anything does come up where we do need to switch a timeline, we'll work with governance and management to make sure that we can work with different timeline to make sure that we could work collaboratively to ensure that we meet those due dates, which is set in October and in December. So speaking of the timeline we have right now in front of us here today, as Jean mentioned, today we're kicking off the audit plan for fiscal year ending June 30th, 2024. And starting today through April, one thing that we do is we start our planning and strategy as it relates to the audit. What does that mean is that today we're going to get some input from governance, but then we'll also meet with management throughout the period February through April to get an understanding in terms of how fiscal year 2024 is going, if there's any unusual transaction, any complex transactions, to get their input. And then, as Jean mentioned, we'll also meet with Chair Farnsworth just to get an understanding, has there been anything discussed at the board level that's potentially a risk area, anything operationally that we should know about, so that we can incorporate those within our planning. Once we meet with management and governance, internally as a CLA team, we'll discuss with our team members so that everyone knows what's the risk as it relates to the university's audit, so that they know what the audit plan is. Moving on to the May-June timeframe, here is where we'll do a lot of the interim testing. And as Jean mentioned, the uniform guidance testing is a significant portion of your testing. There's a lot of federal grants that need to be tested. And as part of the testing, there's a lot of samples that as auditors we need to test. So we'll make sure that before that May-June timeframe, review your CFA, know what the samples we need to select so that we can select those before that May-June timeframe and test a significant of that uniform guidance audit within that timeframe. Additionally, as it relates to the financial statement audit, we'll go through your key controls, walk it through to make sure we can get those items completed in May, June, and also build our PERM document since we know we're new auditors university to alleviate some of the stress later on in the process. And then during this May-June timeframe also, we will have our IT team. We have a separate team that will do some of the IT work, and they'll work with the IT management. We'll work also with the accounting department just to gain an understanding in terms of your information technology control environment for auditing standards. Then fast forward to the August to October timeframe. Here is where we'll do the bulk of our testing. Here is where we'll confirm accounts. We'll request certain invoices. As we go through our procedures, if we need to talk to management on certain inquiries, we'll make sure that we're working with management to get the necessary information that we need. And then also we'll ask for additional support as needed throughout the audit process. And the reason for doing this is just to make sure that we can get that sufficient audit evidence. So come mid-October to end of October, we're ready to issue the consolidated financial statement audit. Then in that November-December timeframe, we will continue to work on the uniform guidance audit, the financial aid examinations by the various campuses, and then also on the NCAA agreed upon procedures so that we're able to issue those by the December deadline. So at the end of the day, one of the things that make this successful is just collaborate with management and governance to make sure that we can meet those deadlines. We do say that, as auditors, we can, get a staff available, but without the help of management and governance, we won't be able to get to where we need to issue the audit. So in terms of the risk assessment, here, as Jean mentioned, as part of auditing procedures, we are required to communicate with a member of governance, and more than likely we will be reaching out to James Farnsworth to get an understanding in terms of what took place within fiscal year 2024. So this slide here touches a bit in terms of the items that we will discuss when we have our meeting. We'll focus on areas that, has been a complex area that was discussed at board level. Is there any risk area that has been discussed that's a cause for concern so that we can incorporate those within our planning procedures? If there's any other concerns, there might be some litigation, there could be operational challenges that you would like to discuss with us, and also there could be, within higher ed, there's a lot of trends happening, so if there's anything that we should be aware of that's impacting university, we'll discuss it at that meeting. And then also, as auditors, we are required to find out if there's any fraud that took place within the fiscal year or any allegations of fraud. So during that time, we will discuss with Chair Farnsworth just to get an understanding in terms of what's there. However, one thing I do want to mention is that even though we are talking to the chair, as a governance or any members of the board, if there's anything that does come up as we look at this slide here, anything from the left for bubble, whether it's significant concerns, known pressures, fraud, or known risk, feel free to reach out to Jean or I, and we can make sure that we discuss any concerns that you have so that we can incorporate it within our planning procedures. The next slide here touches a bit in terms of significant risk. As auditors, we are required to communicate a significant risk of material misstatement to governance. And, we're new to the university. We're still in our planning phases. However, there are still some presumptive risk as it relates to audits and the higher education industry. The two risks that we've noted is management override of controls and revenue recognition. This is not to say that this is unique to the university, but just based on our history of auditing various higher education institutions, these are the presumed risks that we noted during our planning phases. However, we're still required to communicate any risk to you. So as we go through our planning process or our audit procedures, if we do find any additional risk, we will make sure that we reach out to Chair Farnsworth to discuss those risks, and then also to members of governance so that everyone knows what are the risks relating to the audit. The next slide here touched a bit in terms of unique audit items that, based on knowing the the University of Minnesota and then also the higher education industry. There is the new Gatsby number 100, which is mostly enhancing descriptions as it relates to accounting changes and error corrections. So overall, it might not have a significant impact, but we'll make sure we work with management to incorporate anything so that the year of implementation, it is good to go. The next piece relates to, we know you have a lot of alternative investments, so we'll make sure that we incorporate testing as it relates to making sure that we're comfortable with how those are valued so that we can get some comfort and reasonableness once we issue our audit opinion. And the next piece, I'll open it up to the governance as it relates to any other items. But one thing we did know as we talked to management, even though we haven't started officially kicking off our planning with management, we did have some conversation in terms of, what's unique to the university. And we know there will be some, new policies and procedures in place in fiscal year 24. So we'll work with management to make sure that we get an understanding and walk through those appropriately. But I would just like to open it up to the committee. Is there any other unique items that we should be aware of, or management?
I think, all right, sounds like this concludes the presentation, so would open it up to the committee for discussion, questions as we begin our planning phase together. Any questions? It was such a thorough presentation. Yeah, I would just say on behalf of the committee and on behalf of the board, welcome. We look forward to our work together and really appreciate you laying out on the onset here not only some introductory business, which I think is important as we're establishing a relationship, but some clear information around roles and responsibilities and governance input. And I think your presentation spoke clearly to the governance setting that we're in. So I would add that. And if there's not anything else, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Our third item is an update on the internal audit activities and results since our October meeting. And I would turn it over to Chief Auditor Galswick to begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth. So the internal audit update begins on page 168 of your document materials. But I want to begin with page 169, the internal audit update summary, where I want to highlight for the audit plan a couple of things on this. One, we're running slightly behind schedule from where we wanted to be on our audit plan, but we still believe that we will either complete or at least initiate, excuse me, all audits that we had on our audit plan that we presented to the committee in June. However, in alignment with the commitments that we've made to the committee on swapping out potential audits, we are looking to replace the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute, or MSI, audit with an audit of data management of central repositories to reallocate those IT audit resources. However, we will still get some coverage on the MSI area through our audit of HIPAA governance and oversight. because MSI is looking to try to become HIPAA compliant, and so we're going to look at those processes associated with that as part of that. As far as staffing goes, we still are short one auditor. However, we have put a pause on hiring that position as we train in our recently hired auditors, but we do expect to post that in the coming months. Follow-up results are on page 171 of your materials. The implementation rate this period was 37%, which again was slightly short of the 40% goal that we shoot for. But if you look at the trending information, as we discussed back in October, that we're now providing as part of that schedule, you can see that it is over double from what the implementation rate was last year at this time of 18%. In addition, over the last 3 periods, it has been over 35%, just again, slightly short of the 40%. We continue to believe that management overall makes good progress on the outstanding issues, given the complexity of the issues and given some of the staffing constraints that leadership has been going through. However, as always, I will inform university leadership and the committee if additional support or even pressure to remediate any of the issues is needed in the future. There are 4 audits that have a total of 7 items that have been outstanding for 2 years. These are detailed more on page 172 of your materials. The first is the UMD School of Fine Arts. I'm happy to report that the Tweed Museum, which is the outstanding issue there related to the inventory, they have now begun their inventory process, and they'll be working to establish an appraisal process as well as that inventory is complete. That will take a considerable amount of time. The current estimate is 6 to 12 months before they're able to get through the inventory of all those items. University Health, Safety and Risk Management is working through the issues related to safety trainings. They're in the process of hiring an outside vendor to review our safety training offerings, as well as establishing tools to assess new employees, transferred employees, et cetera, for their types of duties and making sure that they get the right trainings assigned. Again, I think they're taking the correct approach by trying to take a more global view of this problem and trying to solve it, and that is taking a considerable amount of time. UMDHR, there's two open issues there that are over 2 years. One is very closely linked to the peak implementation, where we had concerns about HR oversight, governance, establishment of service level agreements, et cetera. And as you know, peak has gone live now in Duluth as of December. However, they're still working through some of the details of that. I would expect that issue would likely be closed here the next follow-up period. The other item is related to a contract with the trade unions. A contract has now been put forth to the trade unions, but that is not yet signed. Finally, dentistry, they have 3 items left of 27. They have made considerable progress through their many open items. The remaining items are related to accounts receivable and billing, which again were slowed down by staffing constraints. They now have their staffing issues in a better place, and they're also working with an outside vendor to take over some of these duties. Again, these 3 issues I would again expect would be closed next period. There's 7 audits that remediated all of their essential items. Canvas and Unison, UMD Health Services, Student Disability Resources, Research Animal Resources, and Hormel Institute. I always want to call them out when they do this because there's a tremendous amount of work that goes on behind the scenes to get all that remediation done and to implement those controls necessary. So again, shout out to them on that. An update on the collaborative assessment of identity and access management is provided on page 174 of your materials. This is again provided by the administration, so the writing there is from the administration. As previously discussed, we don't do standard follow-up on collaborative assessments, given the multi-year nature of some of these risks and the implementation. However, we do plan to come back in and do an audit of that remediation once that is established. As a reminder to the committee, the administration will be presenting in May to provide an update on their remediation efforts, including what the current statuses of those risks that were identified in that report. On page 188 of your materials, we have our audit activity. This summarizes the work we completed over the last 4 months. This includes the completion of 8 audits and 1 SNAP review. The SNAP review is related to travel card expense submissions, which a little more detail on that is on page 197. For the audit reports completed, we had 3 transition reviews that we completed of deans for the College of Liberal Arts, Law School, and the College of Design. There were no major issues identified in any of those transition reviews. We also issued 5 standard audit reports in the last period. 2 were rated as good. First, the men's and women's cross-country track and field sports. This is our annual NCAA compliance audit that we do for different sports within the Twin Cities. We decided to combine all these sports together in part because they all roll up to a single director/head coach, and frankly, just to get more coverage of some of the smaller sports on campus. The Graham-Leach-Biley Act was compliance was the other area where we rated as good. The university, to give you a little background on this, the university is required to comply with this federal financial regulation because of some of the financial activities that we perform, including student loans for students. There's been changes to this regulation recently, which has required the administration to establish new processes and governance and oversight, especially related to security questions. So I think these results of good are especially noteworthy given the relatively quick process that they had to go through in order to implement those new oversight procedures. And though we do see that there's some additional governance and oversight improvements that are still needed, overall we think that they're doing a really good job. There was one audit that we rated as adequate. That is the Next Gen Med program. As the committee knows, this is an innovative program that was established as a president-driven initiative. It leverages a Mayo-funded internship, partnerships with Google for some technology, and provides a path to graduation for students in 2.5 years. Overall, we found the controls to be adequate, but improvements are needed with governance and IT controls, especially given the financial resources used to establish the program, and it being used at least partly as a model for other next-gen programs that have been discussed at Mission Fulfillment and elsewhere. Problems are particularly noted with the platform developed with Google, which is referred to as the SEP. The system ultimately didn't meet expectations and contained several control vulnerabilities and some other problems, which resulted in the tool being discontinued from use during the audit altogether because those services could be provided by the standard learning management system. However, Google has since committed to re-engaging with you to try to resolve some of these issues and see if they can put together a service and a tool that can meet the university's expectations. 2 audits were identified as needs improvement, UMD Athletics and OIT Server Administration. First, for UMD Athletics, from a scoping perspective, I think it's important to note that we reviewed in this audit only the operations. We didn't look at NCAA compliance. We will do that in a later audit, maybe in next fiscal year, potentially the year after. So what we found was despite UMD Athletics' competitive success and leadership demonstrating strong commitment to the mission, we found control issues across all the areas that we reviewed. Many of these issues stem from informal processes, staffing constraints, and the IT support model, which lacks oversight by a dedicated IT professional. I think it's important to note that many of these issues predate the existing athletic director, who began in August of 2022, and management is already working to resolve these issues. However, UMD Athletics is currently experiencing financial constraints which may hinder the speed in which that remediation can occur. Secondly is OIT Server Administration. We found areas for improvement which were communicated to management in several areas. Many issues stem from the high level of inherent risk associated with the nature and scope of these operations. This report is different than our standard report, which we normally would issue as public. It's considered to be a non-public report due to the information security information that is contained in the report under Minnesota Statute 1337. So I ask if the committee would like to discuss this report further to work with the chair in order to be able to set up a closed meeting of the ACC. Finally, the remediation plans that reference peak. This is a schedule you can see on page 198. The schedule shows all the reports management action plans, so all of our audit reports management action plans that reference peak to address the identified issues over the last 3 fiscal years. Per committee leadership's request, we've added to the schedule this period a column indicating what phase of peak units are scheduled in. So for the essential items that you see there, we will do follow-up as we normally do. So for example, UMDHR, which we've already discussed. For the items that were rated as significant in the original report, we will work with management over the coming months to get an update from them on the status of that remediation. With that, that concludes my remarks, and I stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chief Auditor Galswick. Any questions or discussions? I think I see Regent Davenport here.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth. My question, kind of an assumption. If we look at the Next Gen Med, and we've got Next Gen Badge and Next Gen Egg coming on, are the issues noted expected to be resolved as we move further into that?
Chief Auditor Galswick.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth, Regent Davenport. So the issues that we identified in this audit related to the Google platform, as of now, that Google platform is not being used with those other next-gen programs. So those would not translate into those other audits. Some of the broader questions related to governance and oversight, I think the institution can take a step back and take a look at how do we provide broader governance and oversight of next-gen and frankly any pilot programs that the institution wants to run going forward. And that may be something that could be discussed further in the mission fulfillment in the months ahead. But I wouldn't expect it to be a one-for-one translation of those potential issues, but there could be lessons learned in areas to think about as those programs move forward.
And then if I may, and so Google's involvement as kind of an early in with us, is their commitment still evident?
Chief Auditor or whoever wants to address that.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Farnsworth, Regent Davenport. If you want additional information, we do actually have some guests that we could bring up as well. We have both Bernie Gladcheck and Laurie Carroll, who could provide maybe some more information on the specifics of Google's commitment. However, my understanding is they are committed to trying to rectify the situation and trying to provide a product that, if not exactly what the original expectations were, perhaps to meet expectations going forward of how can we create some sort of tool that could leverage our existing learning management framework, for example, that could be something that would be more scalable, et cetera.
Okay.
Does that help?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Regent Davenport. And I also have a question about Next Gen Med and the platform, and certainly welcome anyone's participation, folks who are here in the audience or up here, to answer this sort of along the lines of what Regent Davenport was asking. So I'm understanding that Google is re-engaging with the university on the student engagement platform and wondering, it says here, Google's committed to re-engaging with the university to try to address the student engagement platform issues and offer a more secure and broadly usable tool. So one, I was wondering about the other next-gen programs, which I think we kind of just discussed, but welcome additions to that. And then wondering if for Next-Gen Med, if that re-engagement on the student engagement platform would be in the scope of our current contract from a financial perspective, or if that would, what that looks like in relation to our current contract. So I welcome anyone who wants to join the conversation.
Good morning.
Morning.
From Chair Farnsworth, members of the committee, Google's involvement is under what you would consider to be the current contract. There are no additional expenditures that are expected to come from this institution to Google for the continuing work that they're doing. I think the other thing that you had brought up is about the platform's current state and its impact to the future next-gen programs. And I want to make sure that our programmatic folks can check me on this, but not all programs use the platform. The programs are unique, the programs are different, they have different needs, and not all of them use the Google platform to deliver the curriculum.
Chair Farnsworth and Regents, I'm enthused to see what will emanate from Google's re-engagement. One of the developments since the initial idea is AI. So when you think about where we started in 21 and what has happened since, I think we're anticipating something interesting, probably different, and hopefully better.
Thank you both for joining or being here and then joining our committee conversation. Maybe I want to emphasize something that Regent Davenport was saying, and maybe it's discussion, maybe now, or maybe it's reflection for later. And the chief auditor touched on this as well, is reflections and thinking about how we have more oversight or engagement and reflection of these pilot programs, or think about what that looks like and lessons learned from Next Gen Med, which we definitely have heard a lot about in these governance settings. I think it is complementary and bolsters the incredible work that's going on in Rochester. And I'm continue to be excited about these Next Gen programs because I think it's the innovative type of thing we should be looking at for our institution. But and maybe it's just a general question to the group, but wanting to explore a little bit more as we look at these pilot programs, and definitely think it's a mission fulfillment conversation as well. I see Chancellor Holzclaws joined us. I don't know if you want to join the discussion as well, but would certainly welcome your input.
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth, and thank you, Regent Davenport, for the question. I'm overseeing the responsibility for Next Gen Ag and now Next Gen Badge, which is in process. And Next Gen Ag, we did run a pilot last year, and at that point in time took time to reflect and make changes both in the curriculum as well as the fact that our Provost Croson has also provided us oversight and also funding to help with those two programs. So what we have developed right now is what we feel is a very strong audit trail for ensuring that, particularly because we have individuals who are being compensated for this, their salary is there, that they're keeping literally a time clock or an hourly as to how, or at least daily, how they've been spending their money for accountability for that. And then to kind of follow up on what Chancellor Carroll said too, I think this does provide, we're not currently using and have never used on those two programs the Google platform, but I think it does provide us a great opportunity to look at artificial intelligence and how to utilize that for simulations. For instance, in Next Gen Badge, they're doing some very interesting virtual reality that will triage mental health, which is very important for people in the criminal justice area to be able to do quick triage, which it actually creates simulations for them to do those virtually, as well as some PTSD. And a lot of the programs, particularly for Next Gen Badge, is built upon the research elements that are happening here on our campus. So we're using the information that's coming from various areas across the whole Twin Cities and across the whole campus to take the research and put it to practice. So going forward, we are certainly aware and appreciative of the pioneering work that Chancellor Carroll did with Google, and look forward to what that may bring. But right now, currently, is not in our plans at this point in time to be using that, but have tried to create a strong trail for use. So as part of your mission fulfillment. So thank you.
Any further discussion or questions from the committee on this topic? Right, this is why it's great to have our chancellors and our team here. So thank you for that. And then I'll just add back to the chief auditor about page 198 around the management remediation plans that involve peak. I just wanted to publicly thank the chief auditor for adding the peak phase to this chart. That was some direct feedback that came out of this committee in previous conversations, and I think that just helps us track from a timeline perspective how all these different pieces fit into peak. So I appreciate you adding that. Any other questions or discussion from the committee on this report? Anything else from the chief auditor on this? Great. Well, there being no additional business before the committee. Oh, what? Let's see. Let's see. Oh, I've totally skipped it. Yep. All right. That brings us to the information items, which are important. And Chief Auditor Galswick, please proceed with your highlights.
Thank you, Chair Farnsworth. There's one information item today on page 199 of your materials. This lists the 4 engagements that the university had with auditing firms that were less than $100,000. None of these were deemed to create independence issues. The first 2 engagements were Deloitte-related engagements, and the other 2 were Ernst & Young tax consultation that occurred in the Carlson School and with the Office of General Counsel.
Great, my apologies. Yes, Regent Davenport.
Just a quick question. Thank you, Chair Farnsworth. On the Job Skills Partnership Grant, do those fees get built in? Do you know, do those fees get built into that grant? Or is that something that's recognized in kind or university? And I don't need that answer. I'm just, oh, thank you. Yes. It's nice to see that Job Skills is giving grants to the University of Minnesota.
Yes, please.
Chair Farnsworth, Regent Davenport, thanks for the question. So as a part of that, a portion of the audit fees are part of the budget, but not all of it. So part of the university does actually support.
Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion on the information items? All right, we'll try this again. So with that, there being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.